Welcome everybody to Wonderland. I'm sure for some of you it's the first time here. We are thrilled to have you here tonight. This is the event I personally am most excited about. And so I just want to welcome everyone. I'm Gail Weisswasser. I'm one of the co-owners of Wonderland. My co-owner over here is Amy Joyce. And we just want to say thank you for turning out tonight to hear Jesse. I'm going to do a quick introduction of Jesse. Jesse Dougherty has been at the Washington Post for 8 years this week. Happy anniversary.
Thanks.
Jesse covered the Nats for 5 of those years, including the team's epic World Series run in 2019.
I sent Gail the bio that you added epic.
I added that.
No editorial.
Just a second ago. It wasn't even on the sheet, I just added it. Since leaving the beat 2 Octobers ago, he has covered college sports for the paper, focusing on business and the future of the industry. Jesse graduated from Syracuse University and grew up just outside of Philly. But I want to talk a little bit, tell you another little story about Jesse, which I think tells you a little bit about what he's like as a person. So it's spring of 2020. I then have a 7-year-old boy, who's now this 12-year-old boy right here. He is a baseball-obsessed Nats fan to the highest order. We have watched the DVD over and over again in the off-season. We're so excited for the start of the new season. We're going to spring training. I mean, it's just like a boy's dream that he's 7 years old and his team has won the World Series. And of course, everybody knows what happens. COVID hits, school is canceled, this boy is home, bored out of his mind, and missing baseball so badly. And I'm a desperate mom. What am I gonna do? How can I entertain him? How can I feed this passion? What can I do, this poor kid? And I'm racking my brain. Who can he talk to? Who can I hook him up with? Who can I connect him with? And I said, well, there's that guy who wrote the book about the Nats, which of course we had read together. And I cold emailed Jesse out of the blue, and who probably himself was kind of bored. And I said, you don't know me. I have a son who's really obsessed with baseball. We're big fans of yours. We love the book. If you ever have any time, would you be willing to maybe just hop on Zoom with him and talk about baseball? And he did. And he did it not once, but he did it monthly for like 6 or 7 months. And it extended. And in fact, they just met for the first time tonight in person because this relationship was all on Zoom. Yeah. So I think I tried to pay you. You said no. Then I tried to give you whiskey or something, and then that never happened because I didn't meet you for a couple of years.
Baseball tickets. Give him baseball.
No, he didn't need the baseball tickets. He had the access. But I think it says a little bit about what Jesse's like as a person. And now we have even a deeper relationship because now Jesse's wife Joan works at Wonderland Books. She's Tuesday and Thursday from 10 to 7, and also an amazing baker. Brought some cookies back here. So this has been, this has turned into a deeper relationship, which has been very nice. So that's just a little bit about Jesse. Anyway, so why don't we get started and tell us a little bit about how you found your way to the Post and sort of what you were looking for and how did you end up there?
Sure. Well, first off, thanks for, good?
Yeah,
okay. Thanks for being here. I never got to do any book events in 2020. As Gail said, there was a global pandemic. So we had like a little 2-city book tour that got canceled. So this is really cool. It's my first book event, maybe my last, but I'm glad we could do it. And just really grateful to everyone who showed up tonight. How I got to the Post and covering baseball. My mom would like me to say I'm from Elkins Park, Pennsylvania, not close to Philly, because I'm very proud of our hometown. So Elkins Park, and went to Syracuse, worked for the student paper, got hired at the Post in 2017, so 8 years ago this week, and covering high school sports, and then just climbed the ladder, did college sports briefly, ended up covering the Nationals, was a first-year beat writer when the team won the World Series, which was a bit of a shock. Also, really fun and lucky, and the current beat writers, Spencer Nussbaum and Andrew Golden, are here tonight, and they have not got to cover winning season yet. So they would probably love to cover World Series run right about now. That's sort of the short clip notes.
Okay. All right, let's talk about the book. When I read the book, I was fascinated by the following questions. I'm going to throw a couple questions at you, and you can answer them how you want. So you're the beat reporter. You're writing these stories every day. you're trying to come up with how to make a Tuesday night 3-2 loss against the Marlins interesting. You're sort of like threading all of those stories together. When did you decide you might want to write a book, which is a different, has a different arc? And, there's, I would assume, two different writing styles and two different, watching the game differently, but like, at what point during that season did you think there's something here that I might want to turn into something bigger? Yeah,
there's two ways to answer the question. I didn't know I wanted to write a book until after Game 6 of the World Series. The Nats were very infamously down 3-2 after losing all 3 games at home, so no one wants to read a book about the team that finishes runner-up. But an editor at Simon & Schuster emailed me after Game 6 at that night, so maybe midnight. I'm in Houston. I just covered the game. He's like, if they win tomorrow night, would you like to write a book about the team? And I was like, yeah, sure. So, you don't root as a beat writer, but now there's a book deal on the line. So you're like, oh man, Max Scherzer, get out of the second inning. So I think it adds a little bit to that. So that's the actual practical answer. When I actually thought the team was like legit good, was late August. So they had, and I've told this story a bunch of times over the years, and I think each time I probably start to get the details more and more wrong. So if you fact check me later, I'm sorry.
Nate will correct.
Yeah, right. Nate will get me. But they had played Thursday night in Pittsburgh, and the Pirates had scheduled a getaway game for 7 p.m., which is like a super bad faux pas in baseball. Mm-hmm. You're supposed to schedule getaway games at 1 o'clock or even 4 o'clock so the team can get to their next city. So the Pirates, maybe because they wanted to add 5 more fans to the 800 people that were there. Sorry, Amy, I know you're from Pittsburgh. They scheduled it for 7 p.m. So the team is like really upset. So the next day they play at Wrigley Field, and they had gotten into Chicago at like 4 a.m. And I had gotten there. I had flown the next morning, and they played at noon. So they're like super tired. And I actually remember there was 2 players who writers wanted to interview who were sleeping at their locker, they were laying down flat, and they were like it was Victor Robles and someone else, and the writers were like shaking their leg to wake them up, that's how tired they were, and they go on and just crush the Cubs all 3 days, and I remember thinking man, these guys had every reason to lose. Mm-hmm. Also, the same lineup Thursday night in almost like a Rudy-esque display of confidence, all went to Davey Martinez and said we want to play tomorrow, even though they were so tired. So they all played all weekend, the same lineup all 3 days. They crushed the Cubs, and on Sunday, the manager Dave Martinez was so excited about the weekend and felt so overcome with how well they played that he started crying after the game. And I didn't know then that he'd start crying all the time, but at that point it was the first time he'd ever cried after a game, so it actually felt really monumental. It became really routine after that, but that's when I was like, okay, this, for some reason it just clicked in my head. Leaving Wrigley Field that day, I was like, this team might, I don't think I thought World Series, but I thought they were a really special team.
All right, getting back to writing a little bit, because my 2 passions are baseball and reading, so I have lots of writing questions for you. So I had assumed that you had thought about a book earlier than Game 6, and that you were out pitching. I had no idea, it just plopped in your lap. Mm-hmm. When you went back through all your articles in order to come up with, did you sort of look at them in a different light? Did you look for different themes? I mean, there were so many great themes of that season. You had the old guys, and you had the young guys, and the sort of the thawing of Steven Strasburg, the emotion, and everything all the stories that we all know, Baby Shark, everything. So, did you go back through all those articles and kind of reshape them in order to come up with the narrative for the book?
Yeah, I think to a degree. So the advice I got from the book editor I worked with was that think of your book like a highway, and every chapter is an off ramp. So I think I haven't reread the book, but I think the first chapter is about signing Patrick Corbin, which at the time went really well. It didn't go too well after that, but so the first chapter is if you think about it, you're driving on a highway and it's Corbin exit, right? And you go off and you spend 10 minutes in Corbin to get a coffee, and then you come back on, and then you drive a little more, and then you get off at the Max Scherzer exit. So the kind of the idea was like the season's the highway. So like that's, you know, I think the chapters are all dated, so that was really easy for my brain that like that was like like the time and the season is the spine, but you're getting off all the time to tell these different stories. So I don't know if I was necessarily like thinking a ton about like how I covered the games because they weren't as important. Like I was trying to tell individual like almost like mini bios in these exits, and that was how I approached it. So like even up to like close to the World Series, like you're still doing that in the book. Like there's a chapter around the NLCS that's all about the advanced scout who sort of helped solve the Cardinals lineup and help them, you know, pitch really well against the Cardinals. Like that was another exit. So until the World Series, I think then you can maybe start to just go straight because like it's the World Series, right? Like everyone's really excited about that. I think till then, like you're just getting off all the time and trying to get back on. So it was more like how can I piece together like the human stories. I think the games, you just kind of that filled it out. But it like there was probably 3 or 4 games that whole year that were like really important. Like the 6-run comeback against the Mets in the 9th inning was a big deal. 7? Yeah. Glad I made it here. And when Max Scherzer pitched with a broken nose, that was like a big game. Sure. Opening days, but like other than that, like the game, there's so many of them. It's hard to go individual on each game.
So, Nate and I think I read this book myself, and then Nate and I read it out loud together. And I want to commend you because, of course, I knew how it ended. I mean, I knew it over and over and over again, and we watched the DVDs. I mean, we knew all the stories, we knew everything, and yet I found myself as I was reading, like, you know, tense and like there was suspense in it, and like, how did you recreate that for people? You created this great, you know, underdog story. Like, you know, how did you achieve that?
I don't know. Thanks. I don't know. I think if you tell the story through the people, it helps, right? Because like they all have like a lot riding on it. Like whether it's your life's work to be the best pitcher on the planet, like Max Scherzer, or you're in a free agency year and you're trying to play as well as possible in order to get the next big contract. Like no matter what, like even if you know the ending, like the people in the middle of it have real stakes, right? Like everything that it's riding on those games is like, and fans, right? Like there's a good bit of fan coverage in the book too, and I mean the real answer is like I just lived it.
Yeah.
So trying to channel the feelings that I had.
So maybe it's because you filled it out with all this human interest that we never saw as fans. We just see the game, but we don't know all these stories. That's what made it feel richer and sort of you felt more invested almost.
I hope so. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about what happened when the book came out. So it came out March the 21st. Was that the publication date?
Yeah,
so really bad time to release a book.
Yeah.
I'm sorry about that.
No, it's okay.
How was it received by fans? How was it received by players? How was it received by the back office or the front office, whatever you call it? I mean, obviously it was a bummer that you didn't get, you know, kind of like Davey didn't get to coach the All-Star game because of COVID and everything got, you know, you kind of got cheated out of your own victory lap. But what type of reception did you get?
Yeah, I mean, a great one. I mean, even just walking in and seeing people have it, I mean, that's enough for me, right? Like people bought it and ordered it to their door, and I do think that on the sales side, I mean, it wasn't Seabiscuit, but but I still have a day job. But it definitely did well. I think because of pre-order. I think because of online orders, like people wanted to read. I hope someone here got to maybe escape for a couple hours in March of 2020 because they read this book. So in that way, it was received well. As far as front office. Mike Rizzo told me he liked the book, but there's no way he read it. But you know, it does pretty well for him. Sean Doolittle, as you can imagine, close reader, gave me some notes, all good, but more so like that was great, or they really, or wow.
So you gave it to him before it.
Yeah, I gave it to a handful of players who I thought would maybe be interested, like Max Scherzer, Sean Doolittle, Ryan Zimmerman. Guys who either I talked to in the process or maybe were bigger characters. I gave it to Mike Rizzo, gave a copy to Davey. Really interesting part of Davey. So the book opens with a scene that I was not like that keen on. My wife's telling me to move this up. It's in his hotel room at the winter meetings in San Diego, which is like whatever. Like, you know, it's famous people have done interviews in hotel rooms. Like, it wasn't that interesting. My grand idea was to like be on Dave Martinez's farm in Nashville that winter and like really tell the story through him and have him be the forward and the afterward in the way that Mike Rizzo was. But he was at the time actually trying to write his own memoir off the season, which is great. I mean, it didn't actually come to fruition, but so he didn't talk for the book. So, I mean, I had hours of tape from him the beat writers will tell you now, you talk to Dave Martinez during the season more than you talk to your significant others. Like, you talk to him twice a day for 6 months, but I didn't actually, he's like the only person of the main principals who I actually did not get to talk to. And it's really weird because he's actually one of the more accessible people, but it's because his agent had advised him not to do any interviews because they were trying to keep his story his. And I was lucky I profiled him a couple times during the season, so like I knew a ton about him and his dad and growing up in New York and how he became a manager and all this stuff. So like I wasn't hurting for material, but that's like the one big like interview miss. And I thought we'd be like on a fishing boat in Nashville at his farm, like telling the story of the season. Like that was my like vision, and then I settled for a hotel room in San Diego, which is just not quite as cinematic, but that was sort of one of the misses of the book. And actually, he apologized later. He was like, "Yeah, well, we never sold that memoir, so I'm sorry I didn't talk to you." And I was like, "That's okay. We made out okay." So.
Yeah. How did writing the book affect did it affect how you covered the team in subsequent seasons?
It's funny. So when you cover a team, most people's contact or like most front office people, like it's tough to get their number. Like it's, you know, because we're mostly as newspaper writers are trying to extract information and get details on trades and free agency and dirt on the front office. So most people like, yeah, like you have some numbers, but you don't have others. When the team wins the World Series, they become short-sighted. So the PR guy was just like, "Here's every number in the organization," because they wanted me to talk to everybody, you know, because like that, and that in December of 2019, like what could go wrong, you know? It's like, so I hope it enhanced my coverage of the team for the newspaper because it opened up like a world of sourcing for me because they were just like, "Here's the advanced scout who helped us in this series. Here's the guy who helped find Juan Soto. Here's the," like, it gave me access to the whole organization in a way that, like, as a first year beat writer, I frankly didn't have. Right. And the PR staff was just so giddy to tell the story of that season. So I don't know if it like changed my day to day at all, but it certainly like made me more sourced up and probably helped me in future years when maybe the things were not as great to help tell that story too. Right. So.
Did it change your stature at the Post?
No.
Okay.
Where
so,
they treat like I'm happy, but
still working.
But I'm still working there.
You're
Yeah,
still working.
that's true. Yeah.
Okay, so you covered the Nats for how many seasons after that?
4 full seasons, a pandemic season plus 3 full ones.
Oh, 3 after that. Okay.
Yeah.
And so then you stopped covering the Nats, and talk about what you've been doing since then.
Sure. Yeah. So I cover college sports business. I kind of loosely describe it as whatever I find interesting in college sports, which I guess is pretty good stature at the Post. I can kind of do what I want, and it's a lot of like how athletes get paid, future of the industry, how college sports are changing. I kind of describe it as like if you're watching a game and they say something like, "Well, that athlete transferred to another school for the 17th time," and you're like, "Huh?" Like that's my beat. Is kind of the huh. So I cover sort of the questions you have about college sports. Is kind of how I describe it.
How do college athletes compare with pro athletes as far as being cooperative with interviews and forthcoming about talking to you?
Yeah, I mean, they're way more guarded, right? Like, I think one of the amazing things about baseball is that it's maybe, I haven't covered the NFL, I've covered the NBA a bit, but it's the last sport, I think, where adults can just talk to adults about stories. And, like, what I mean is, like, in most other sports, there's, like, a PR person, there's an agent, there's a marketing rep, there's, whatever it is. The kind of truth of it is, like, in the grand scheme, baseball players aren't that famous. Like, they are, like locally and in their own sport, but like the fame and the overexposure of like an NBA star, an NFL player, or even a college athlete these days is like so much higher, and with that comes so many walls around them. Where like Max Scherzer will probably be a first ballot Hall of Famer, and I could say during that season I talked to him 6 days a week, and it is like impossible to get, I don't know, Carson Beck at Miami quarterback. Like his PR person might say, you could fly to Miami on a whim, and well, yeah, we'll give him to you for 10 minutes. And it's just such a different level of like protection and sort of curating the access. Where baseball, one thing I loved about it, and I hope is still true, is that like you can really just tell the stories and talk to people like you're a human being. And if they don't want to talk to you on a given day, or they're annoyed at you for your coverage, they can say no. But you generally have that interaction face to face. You're not going through like 17 marketing reps in order to talk to the star player. So like the fact that I was so involved day to day with someone like a future Hall of Famer like that is not lost on me. I think that's very unique to baseball. So I guess I took your question and praised that sport more than I talked about college, but I just think like it's just such a unique sport in that way. The access is so good, and you become such a part of it because you're there every single day. So that's definitely a big difference.
So let's talk about sports journalism a little bit. Do you, like, what's your philosophy on sports journalism? Like, do you view it as, it's
Why are you
sort of
laughing?
a
No,
vehicle, like, it's obviously it's a vehicle for fan engagement. It
Sure.
keeps people informed.
Yeah.
It tells great stories. But do you believe that sports journalism should and can play a larger role in kind of shaping, where sports are going, or policies? Like, you do a lot with NIL, like,
Yeah.
and you write a lot about, ways that the sport is changing, and you don't shy away from kind of expressing an opinion. Like, what's your take on that?
Yeah, I think it's twofold. I think like one, it's like really important for me and my colleagues to recognize that like in these unprecedented times, that like sports are an escape for people, right? So like I think, and I'm not saying like stick to sports necessarily, but like it doesn't have to always be so serious in this corner of the world or the news world, right? Like they are games. We watch them because we enjoy the games. After working 9 to 5 or watching MSNBC or CNN, like it can be really nice to shut your brain off and turn on the Nationals or the, whoever it may be. So like I think that's important, and our job, I think, in some ways, is to like entertain and inform and make your experience watching that game much more fruitful, because you say, hey, Jesse wrote about why that guy's taking a lead that way. And now I'm watching and I see him have a steal, and I'm sitting next to my friend and I can tell you what, because I wear the Washington Post today, I can tell you why he did that. I think that's part of our job, right? Like I think enhancing the experience of following these teams. We're not marketing for them necessarily, but I think like if you feel like you learn and you get something out of my coverage, I think you'll come back, right? And that's what we're in the business of. It's like we're competing for your attention, and increasingly that's 100 billion things can take that, right? TikTok or Instagram or going to the beach or whatever. Like we need your attention. So like what can we do in order to get that? So I think it can be entertainment. It doesn't have to always like mirror society. The other thing I will say is my first editor at the Washington Post used to say that the best thing about sports, or one of the things about sports, is you can get people to think they're going to be eating French fries and actually serve them potatoes. And what he would mean was like you flip to the sports section and you're like, all right, I'm going to read about the the big game last night, and now you're like, now I'm reading about immigration policy. Like what's going on, right? But it's like a little bit of a Trojan horse. So I think we can kind of use storytelling and human interest storytelling through sport to inform people about some larger societal topics, right? Or people who are maybe being marginalized. So I do think on one hand, there is an entertaining component that can be removed from that, but it's also a real opportunity to engage people who might not, otherwise want to read about some heavier, weightier topics, but might actually submit to that because it's in the sports page. So that's, I think that's a unique opportunity. You don't do that every day, but when you get to, it can be really rewarding.
Yeah. What do you like to read when you're not covering? I know you're a big reader. So
Yeah.
What section of the store would you go
Definitely
to?
fiction first. So I think any just contemporary fiction. I love Colson Whitehead. We were talking in the car on the way here about Colson Whitehead. I'm trying to think what I'm reading right now. I read like 5 things at once sometimes. My brain's a little scattered. Yeah. But yeah, any contemporary fiction I love. My wife and I were just like constantly have our noses in books. So having her work here with the employee discounts a big upgrade for us.
That's only supposed to be for the employees. I'm kidding, I know. Okay, my last question, and this is the same question that any true baseball fan asks themselves and boasts about on a daily basis. What's your walk-up song?
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I'm gonna stick to. So my dad loves the band. And so The Wait is one of my favorite songs. And I used to go on the Junkies every Monday. And they once asked me what my walk-up song would be. I thought it was like an attack on like this, like the end of an interview, I guess. And then they started playing it every time I would come on. So I guess it is my walk-up song if I ever had one. So The Wait by the band, yeah. But yeah, they would play it on Monday mornings when I would go on at 7 or 8 or whatever it was. So
Nice.
yeah.
Okay, well, I want to open this to questions. We have lots of Nats fans in the room. I'm sure we're going to get a lot of minutia about the World Series.
Sure.
So, go ahead.
Do you have a favorite player from your 5 years?
Yeah, two
So the question was if he had a favorite player.
Yeah. Favorite player to talk to, it's not going to be anyone's surprise, is Sean Doolittle. I used to tell Sean Doolittle I wish he was a shortstop because I was like, I can't write about the closer that much. you only pitch one inning a game. Like, you're just not that relevant. Like, I mean, of course you are. He was three-time All-Star or whatever. But I wish he was a little more prominent to the outcome of the games. But just an incredibly thoughtful athlete. Like, whatever you know about his like politics and reading habits, like sure, but like also just like immensely smart about baseball. Now a pitching coach with the team, probably very good for them. So and then to watch Juan Soto, it's really, I mean, he's on the cover of the book. Just like not also an incredibly insightful athlete to talk to in his second language, which makes it crazier. But also just like what am I going to see tonight? Like it just felt like every game I watched him. My first day on the beat, Jorge Castillo, who is a former Nats beat writer, was like, he had a single. He was like, so you just saw a Hall of Famer get a hit? And I was like, oh, okay. And that was my first day, and I covered him then for the next 3 or so years, and like every day was something new. So definitely like athletes who do amazing things is like kind of our business. So athletes who do amazing things end up being our favorite players a lot of the time. So.
Go ahead.
I actually have 2 questions, but
Sure.
One's short. Are there any players or well-known front office people that, and you don't have to name names, but did not like the book or kind of had some negative feedback? So, and again, you
Sure.
just let us speculate. And then the second question is there any story that you wrote in the book but got cut that you wish had stayed in the book?
No, the cool thing about the book is like they don't cut anything. Like I mean,
Okay.
they can, but like newspapers, the editors of newspapers are the chopping block. Book is 312 pages. Most things got in, so that was cool. No, I didn't get any negative feedback. I mean, it's pretty unimpeachable, right? Like you win a World Series, like it's like everyone's pretty happy, and I guess there was maybe some stuff in there about like internal like trade discussions or contract disputes or whatever. But like at that point in March 2020, like. No one in that building was picking bones. Like they were pretty excited about all the publicity they were getting. They're in a book, like so. I would say actually, like the next 3 years after that, sure, I have a lot of stories. But the book is pretty good in terms of relationships. Yeah.
Jamie.
So, you're a young man who is into baseball.
Yeah.
How do you feel about kids coming up and sort of their interest in baseball? Because Nate is obviously a huge baseball fan, which I totally appreciate.
Yeah.
My son used to be my buddy to go to baseball games.
Yeah.
He's almost 17 now. He saw Max Scherzer's 20 strikeout game. He saw the no-hitter with Jordan Zimmerman when he was a kid. He's all about the NBA and the NFL.
Yeah.
And just if I take him over, he went to Father's Day with me. Thank God my friend was there because my son sat on his phone the whole time. I didn't talk to him once, you know. So I'm just curious, because it does compete, but like you said, there is something beautiful about baseball because it is an everyday thing.
Sure.
And it doesn't have the star power. I mean, my brother-in-law didn't know who Shohei Ohtani was. And he actually looks like Shohei at times. He's Filipino, Shohei is Japanese, but they look alike.
Sure.
But they just don't have that same star power
Yeah.
in the greater world. But maybe that's a good thing.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've thought when I used to cover baseball, I would think a lot about this because an existential question for baseball is like, how does it stave off death? But what I will say is, there was a writer from Sports Illustrated who a couple years ago did a story where she went and found a story from every decade going back to 1890 about baseball's death. Baseball's still here. So I think it's like there's some general angst of people who like love this sport that maybe is not as popular as maybe some other ones, that like something has to change, right? I do think it's pretty hyper regional. I don't think it necessarily is ever going to have the national cachet of some of these other sports. 18 games a year is a lot different than 162, just in terms of engaging people and getting them excited. So
it is affordable.
it is,
compared to
yeah, sure.
the others.
Yeah. So I don't know. I mean, I think for your son specifically, I mean, my dad can maybe attest. Like I kind of shut off baseball in my brain when I went to college, and maybe 17 to 25 or 24 was not necessarily my big years either. But then I guess I was pulled back into it by this job. But like, and now it's like definitely something I enjoy. Like like we go to games and sit in the $5 DC seats a couple times a summer, and it's really nice. And I would love to get back to keeping score at games. Like I used to do that in the press box and loved it. So maybe it's a little bit of like a childhood thing, and then like an acquired taste once you pass through a certain age. I think that could be.
Yeah, my daughter who's 20 is a junior in college. She actually now goes to games.
There you go.
When
So
she's
maybe
young.
it's just
So
maybe it's a
she's
phase.
come back to it. So
Maybe it's a
who
phase.
knows? Maybe
Yeah.
you're right.
Yeah.
You're covering the business side of sports in some aspect.
Sure.
What do you feel about sports betting in
I do not bet. Not for any moral reason, just because I don't enjoy it. Oh man, it's interesting. I think in some ways it probably keeps people engaged at a certain age that I probably should appreciate, because people reading is why I have a job. So like, I think to denigrate it totally would probably be short-sighted by me, because there are a lot of engaged 25 to 35-year-old men, frankly, who probably want to know about the latest injury update or the game breakdown because they have some wager on it. How I feel personally, I mean, yeah, I wish it would just cease to exist. That would be nice. I think the advent of it in stadiums is, frankly, like, deplorable. You don't need to bet on every play. You certainly don't need to have it at your fingertips. I think you should have to, at a minimum, go at least turn in a bet slip at a window and interact with a human being, because I think probably what it's doing to the brain of 18 to 22-year-olds in college, and if not younger, is like maybe irreparable in some ways. So like, yeah, I'm not a fan at all. I think we need to, I mean, it sounds like a soapbox, but I think it'd be great if it was regulated in some way. And the accessibility, I think, is a real issue. And it coming into stadiums is bad as well. And then you can start to figure out integrity of the game. I mean, I think the biggest betting scandal, I mean, it's, in some ways it's percolating in the media right now, but we don't even know it yet. It's being investigated. It's probably being uncovered. It's being written up by some FBI agent in some field office, and it's going to hit us in the side of the head like crazy. Like, we don't even know which athlete out there is fixing games. So I think it's going to be a real culture shock when it happens, and a lot of things will have to change after that. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if you consider him a colleague or a predecessor, but Fred Farmer wrote a book about Washington
Yeah.
baseball.
Uh-huh.
And one of the things I liked about that book was that he talked a lot about the different owners of the various teams. And I was just wondering, do you get any access to the owners? Do you get to talk to them? Do you get any kind of information about what they're thinking, or is there limits to you?
Yeah, I do consider Fred a colleague. He does great stuff for the Post, and was at our Christmas party a couple weeks ago, so that was fun to see him. Yeah, sorry, I got you. Ownership access. Typically, it's very, very limited. I did interview Mark Lerner for the book in his office. Only time I'd ever been there. It was fine. I mean, I think personally, like, on the pecking order of people I'm interested in talking to after a win, he's probably pretty low. Not just him, just any owner. Like, that's just, it's just they're pretty removed. But yeah, like that certainly was like the only real time. Like I think after they were like about to trade Soto, and he got Andre on the field for some DC Sports Hall of Fame or something, and I approached him and tried to get some quote, trying to ask for fans like, hey, can you at least explain to people like how you're going to trade away Juan freaking Soto? And it was just immediately like, you know, the PR person elbows you out of the way. I'm not saying it was physical, but it might have been. But yeah, so access is pretty limited. But I did talk to him for the book, and that was cool. I was glad to sit down with him. He had people who've been here for a long time will appreciate this. He had 3 framed Tom Boswell tweets in his office. I love Boz. I would tell him, Boz is like 80 years old. He has Boz's tweets. Like, at least frame a column. Like, so it was like the Learners did an amazing job hosting the All-Star game, and frame it. And I was like, I remember walking in and being like, those Boz's tweets? Like, so that was one of the things I'll always remember about Mark Lerner's office was the framed tweets. I wonder if they're still up. I don't know.
Yeah, over there.
If you're writing a story on 162 games a year, many of which are ordinary or
Sure.
remarkable to the untrained or even trained eye, how do you keep each story unique and your readers interested?
Yeah, it's really hard. It's really hard. That's what keeps Space Warriors up at night. Is like, I got to cover this June 6th game against the Marlins. I think Gail said earlier, and like I got to find a way to make it interesting. I think what you do is you try to do a lot of legwork ahead of time. So like if you are keeping really detailed notes in spring training, in your conversations with people, it makes it easier to clock when like something interesting happens that maybe no one else sees. So like, let's say Luis Garcia hits a double in the left center gap. Well, wait, don't I have notes from West Palm Beach when he was doing the same drill over and over with the hitting coach on a backfield that enabled him to keep his hands at a certain point, you know, whatever it is. And you watch and you're like, that looks really familiar. I think that he was working on that with that coach. So then when you're in the press box in June 6th and it's like everyone else is just typing up their random story, whatever, you can say, I'm going to go try and find the hitting coach after the game or talk to Luis Garcia about that drill. So I guess the answer is like, it usually happens like months before is like how that story becomes interesting, I think. Like it doesn't, like if you watch a 7-2 game, it's a 7-2 game. Like you can't make it up, you know. Like so, like people watched it. You have to try and add some texture to that, but it's hard. But I think if you do your homework and you're really diligent about your research and your reporting and your phone calls and you're talking to the scouts in the hometown who found this person, like the cool thing about baseball is like it's a 26-person roster. Like NFL is, I don't know. I don't know the NFL, anywhere from 50 to 500 in my brain. Like but baseball is just 26, so you can really be an expert on 26 people, right? Like that's not that hard. So when those games happen and you can sort of tap into like that backstory, then like the next day in the newspaper you're reading it and you're like, man, like how did that come out of that game? And like I think that's what you try to do. Now, have I written boring game stories? Yeah, like hundreds maybe. But like I think you try your best to stave that off by like being prepared, I guess.
Oh, okay. Go ahead.
Okay. So I have like a 2-part question, and the first one is sort of related to the one about like when you thought they would be good, when you knew they were good. So I sort of, when in the following seasons did you sort of realize that the team
They were not good?
was like that the original team that won the World Series was like never coming back, and they were sort of apart, and that they just weren't the same team.
Yeah.
And then my other part is, in those years, have there been any sort of glimpses of that beginning team that you've been able to see?
I'm gonna repeat the question if you didn't hear it. The first part is, when did you realize in subsequent seasons that the Nats were really just a kind of a shadow of their former self? And have you seen glimpses going forward of a team that could reclaim that glory?
Yeah. Certainly the 2021 trade deadline when they traded 8 players was probably like, I mean, I think until that happened, I probably didn't reckon fully with the fact that it was going to. Joan will also attest, I like maybe tested positive for COVID that morning, and I was like running around Philadelphia trying to find a test, so my head wasn't totally in the trade deadline coverage. It was a little stressful that day, but yeah, I mean, I think that after that deadline, like that's the demarcation. Like they tried to hold on, they tried to re-sign the players, they brought back a lot of the older guys, and then that sort of like that's the beginning or the sort of end of one thing and beginning of another. And of course there were signs before that they weren't good enough. That's why they ended up trading all the players. But I think like until you see how much they traded everyone, like and how big the teardown was, like I didn't think it'd be quite that extreme. So definitely that July. And then glimpses, I don't know. This is what I'm going to say. Go bother Andrew and Spencer if you can after this. But I don't follow quite as closely as I used to. But certainly, like some of the players now are really exciting. I went and covered James Wood when he was a minor leaguer, and like, what was that sound that just made when he hit the ball? You know, like it just was something different. And seeing him run the bases and everything. I also went to LSU to cover Dylan Cruz when he was still in college, thinking he might be a Nationals draft pick. So certainly, it's fun for me now as sort of a ex-beat writer to see those young guys come up and start to begin their major league careers. I'd say certainly like as positive or as exciting as it's been since I've left the beat is right now, which I guess is supposed to move in a linear direction, so that makes sense. So I'd say like now maybe is more exciting.
I also just realized something too about the Nationals having the #1 pick this year.
Pretty cool, yeah.
Do you like have anyone in mind that they might choose or
Nate,
not
I'm
cover
sorry to
that?
tell you,
Yeah.
I don't even know who the options are, but I'm going to ask you after to tell me who they should pick. We'll talk about it because you have some options, I think, right?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. We'll catch up
We
then.
have a question back there.
I thought it was an excellent book.
Thank you.
Because the way you wove in so many
Thank you. I appreciate
stories
that.
and on-ramps. And one thing that's exciting is the acquisition of all the players.
Yeah.
And the learners were pretty aggressive. You know, Worth, Jason Worth,
Yeah.
Scherzer,
Sure.
Corbin, etc.
Yeah.
And you cover that. And so now I'm looking, is the new ownership story, is that a dead story right now? First part.
Oh man, I wish I knew.
Yeah,
Yeah,
okay.
sorry.
Second of all,
Yeah.
I mean, don't you think the Nats would benefit if they had sort of someone who would back up Rizzo with a better check?
Yeah. Yes. But to give you a little bit more than that, the Cleveland Guardians' last playoffs proved that you can make it on the cheap. Diamondbacks a couple years ago. Almost every other team proves that if you spend, it usually works. So like I think the Nats in 2019, their payroll was about 210. I can't tell you off the top of my head where that ranked, but if you adjust that for inflation, I think it would be one of the higher payrolls right now in baseball if they kept going in the right direction. So like, yeah, I mean like that team it was old and it had some young guys, but like they certainly put some money into it, right? Like it was so like that's what you got to do, and yeah, either spend some money or sell the team is what I would say if I were yeah.
I don't think it's impossible, spring coming, that this team could still be really good this year.
Sure.
All these things click.
For sure.
Young pitchers and
Yeah.
Garcia and James Wood and all those players.
Yeah.
But it just seems like they still are looking for that one Jason Worth type
Yeah.
serious guy. Jason Worth, Scherzer are the kind of these hyper competitive guys.
For
that
sure.
You want lighting a fire under the whole team.
Yeah, and I think like most teams have a couple guys who are pretty high paid, and that's just like that's the model. So we'll see what the learners do with that.
But nothing on nothing on.
No, I don't have any inside info. I'm gonna break some news today. Actually, the Nationals have just sold. No, no, I don't know. I don't know about the team. I wish I did. I'm sorry. I wish I had more for you. Yeah. It's a good question.
Okay, I think we have room for maybe 2 more questions. So in the back, yeah.
How much time after the last out did you have to file the story?
Oh man, like 5 minutes. But then you go. Yeah, you're. Yeah, sure. Yeah, you work on it all day almost. I mean, I think a lot of times, especially for those playoff games, you're trying to zoom out and give maybe a historical perspective of what it means. Some things you can write. Todd Zalecki is a baseball writer in Philadelphia, and I'm from Philadelphia. Ooh, I know.
Elkins Park.
Yeah, Elkins Park. Yeah. And when the Phillies won the World Series in 2008, he wrote this column that I thought was incredible. And I ended up meeting him years later in the press box, and I said, Todd, I love that column. He goes, yeah, I wrote it 3 days earlier in a Starbucks. Well, that kind of takes away from the story a little bit. So I didn't quite do that because I probably wasn't that confident, but definitely like chipping away all day. You're adding lines, and then you're moving things around. I mean, I think I was writing a lost story until Howie Kendrick hits the foul pole. So, I mean, and that was the only time that year where I opened up 2 documents to work in. Usually I could handle one and move it around enough. But that night I was like, I need a loss document and a win document. So I waited until game 7, held out. But that night I definitely was like working in 2 different parallel, documents.
Do you still have that lost document?
Oh man, I don't know. That's a good question. Yeah, it's a good question. Yeah.
Do we have a question? Yeah, go ahead.
Why didn't you make the title of the book Buzz?
Oh, great question. So after the Nationals advanced to the World Series, after Game 4 against the Cardinals in D.C., I was talking to Steven Strasburg, who is famously a bad quote, and which makes it amazing that he's the quote on the front of the book I wrote. And he was talking about how in the past the Nationals were really good. They had great teams. They spent a lot of money on their rosters, but sometimes you just run into a buzzsaw and you can't do anything about it. And then he said, maybe this year we're the buzzsaw. So that was the idea behind the cover. And I still do laugh that guy who gave me so much hell over the years, not saying anything, ends up delivering the line that I put on the cover of the book. So it's pretty amazing.
Okay, we'll do one more.
My favorite part of your book, Jess, was when you were describing the Nats wooing Corbin.
Yeah.
And the whole thing where they took him to a fancy Georgetown
I have a
restaurant.
funny story about this. Yeah.
And they were wooing him kind of like he was a corporate lawyer, a big time corporate lawyer.
Yeah.
And I got the feeling that while I was reading this, that they could have taken him to Hamburger Hamlet. They would have had the same thing.
Sure, yeah. 140 million usually is the selling point. Not the yeah.
And one last thing, that great moment in the play-in game with the Brewers. I know you're, like you said, you're writing the entire thing. What did you have up to that point in which that ball graciously veered away?
That's great. You asked 2 great questions. Are you finished? I'm sorry.
That's it. Just
okay.
What was your,
Not to extend the time here, but I do have a good story. So the Nationals, when they were trying to sign Patrick Corbin, they took him to Filamare in Georgetown on the waterfront. And I called my agent, maybe the publishing house, and was like, hey, would you expense a dinner at Filamare? Because I thought it'd be cool for me to see what it was like, just get the inside, look at the menu. They had $10,000 wine on the menu. I didn't buy that, but when I was there, I started to take notes on a notepad, and I think the restaurant thought I was a restaurant critic. So they start bringing out all this food, oh, sir, seafood tower on us. And I'm like, oh, thank you. And they're like the chef got that bottle of wine. I'm like, sure. And I'm 25 at this point. I don't know how to do all that, And I'm like, all right. So it was this amazing dinner, and I just needed to see what color the walls were. I probably was gonna order 2 things and get out of there. So I felt like Tom Stietzma for a night, I guess, was there, which was pretty cool. And then the question about the Juan Soto single, triple, it was funny. So Soto hits the single to go ahead in the 8th inning of the wild card game, and he hits it, but then on the same play he gets out between 2nd and 3rd. He rounded 2nd too hard and he gets out. So at that point, my story, they were down 2 runs, I think. Yeah, 2 runs in the 8th inning of the wild card game. 90% of my story is season and dies in ashes. It's over. It was so fun, but damn. And I was super casually talking to Sam Fortier at the time, who was my beat partner, now covers the Commanders for the Washington Post. And I was like, hey, can you, this is literally my temperament in that moment. Could you look up, what lefties hit against Josh Hader this year? Because Juan Soto just did it off Josh Hader. And I'm like, I would be curious. And he literally shook my shoulders and said, right. You have to write. Because I don't think I really realized that the inning had changed over. Because he got out on the same play, the Nats went from losing to 3 outs away from making the next round. So and I was kind of oh yeah, this is a nice hit. And he was like, dude, you have to write your story. And so I was, oh yeah. And I think I went back and looked, and it was 8 minutes later they get the final out. So if you count the TV timeouts in the next inning. So I don't know. I don't know what happened in the paper that day. But the book, I was able to take more time when I wrote about it. So that was good. A good do-over maybe.
Great moment.
It was really cool.
It really was.
So if you bought Jesse's book back in 2020, he'd be happy to sign it. If you did not buy it, but you want a copy, we have them here. We'd love to sell you a copy, and he can sign it here. He'll be sitting up here.
I want you to meet Millie Rose.
Yeah.
Who's on page 688 or something, and
Yeah.
she's just fallen asleep.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so he'll
Yeah.
be here. He's happy to meet people.
Can I just quickly say what that is? We had a section at the end of the book about fans and how they experience the final out of the World Series, and Millie Rose was born right before the end of the game, and so I talked to Luke, and they're included in there, and I just across the street was refreshing my 288. Okay, page 288. I was refreshing my memory, and I wrote in there, not to pat myself on the back, that your lives would never be the same, and I hope that's been true. So, yeah, and Millie never knew a world in which the Nationals weren't World Series champions. So that's really cool to hear. So thanks for being here.
So if you'd like to buy a book, we have them up here. I'd like to thank everybody for coming tonight. Thank you, Jesse, for a great talk.